Our text for this morning is taken from Matthew's Gospel, the 16th chapter, beginning with the 13th verse. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist. Others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are the Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. I'd like to begin today by telling a story about a man I once knew. A few of you will immediately, or almost immediately, know the person of whom I'm speaking, but hopefully, by the time I'm done with this story, you will all see the connection to our text. I once knew a man. He was, how shall we say this, a denizen of the town where I had my church. He had lived there for many years, and anyone who spends any time in this town, especially around Main Street, knew the man, at least knew him by sight. Now the story he told me while I was visiting him in the hospital one day, the story he apparently told everyone else who was willing to stick around and listen, was that he had been dishonorably discharged from military service. Specifically, he claimed that he had, under duress, pointed a rifle at a superior. Now, while there were certain aspects of that story I surely wondered about, frankly, the man had enough other obvious issues that I simply filed the story away. Now, when he wasn't in the hospital for chronic diabetic reactions, the man could be as gentle as a lamb if you met him on the street, or perchance he could be as angry and as vicious as any cornered animal if you happen to speak to him the wrong way. Yet his anger was very much that of a child in need of attention and discipline. He once threatened me while I was giving him a ride home late one night, thinking, perhaps foolishly, I might teach him a lesson. I put him out of my car, for he was only a few blocks from home, and I proceeded to drive around the block. Of course, those of you who know me realize it didn't take but a few moments for guilt to set in, and I went back to check on my erstwhile charge. And there he was, exactly where I had left him, standing on the street crying. "Did you learn your lesson?" I asked, trying to play the tough parent to this old man. "Yes, Pastor Anthony, I'm sorry," he choked out through his tears. That wasn't the last time he would turn on me, though it was the last time I felt I could do that sort of parenting, probably more because of my shortcomings than his. About a year later, the man would die. By the time I had learned of this, his sister, from whom he had been estranged for many years and apparently had no contact with at all, had arranged to have a minister she picked out of the phone book preside over his memorial service, although someone had tipped her off that she should ask me to speak. Now the service proved interesting on a number of levels. First, for the sheer number of people who were there. For all his rough edges, The man we are speaking of apparently touched many lives. But it was also an interesting occasion because of who was there. Representatives from the state assembly and a military honor guard. You see, the protagonist of this story had in fact not been dishonorably discharged as he, for some inexplicable reason, liked to tell people. In fact, he had been decorated for exemplary service in combat a number of times. Set up around his casket were framed official letters of thanks and congratulations from various official personages, including the President of the United States. Now, things became even more interesting when the phone book preacher began to eulogize our hero. He spoke of his positive Christian witness right up until the end, the way in which he lived his life as a moral example to everyone around him, and never had a harsh word for anyone. And then it was my turn to speak. And all I'll say is that I did my best, perhaps to the relief of those who'd known our protagonist best, to paint a realistic picture of the man, flawed like all of us, but nonetheless loved by God, who grants new and abundant life to his children. So who was this guy? Not his name, but his character, his real personhood. Was he the shiftless, substance-addled, semi-straight person who had been drummed out of military service? Was he the war hero who had, upon returning stateside, fallen victim to a culture that was tired of a war it didn't want? Was he really, on some level, as the hapless hired preacher suggested, a model of upright Christian behavior? Was he what most of us in town thought, a man with a good heart and a lot of residual problems that a lot of folks found somewhat difficult to take? Of course, the connection between this little piece of local history and the text, who we say someone is, makes all the difference, doesn't it? What we think of them affects how we treat them, and what we say about them affects what others think and how they will react. If I had told you I was going to give you a story about a war hero, it would have affected you differently. I wonder if I had felt the man in question was a war hero when I knew him during his life. Would I have treated him differently? Would I possibly have been somehow more understanding? I don't really know how I would have reacted, but I know it probably would have made a difference. As Jesus asks his disciples who people say he is, and ultimately whom they say he is, he knows that the answer will make all the difference. Now it's Peter who answers, "You are the Son of the living God." And Jesus seems decidedly pleased with Peter's answer. Now we're not told how or if the other disciples gave their own answers. My question for all of us today is, who do we say Jesus is? The answer is important, because if we are to call ourselves Christians, little Christs, then the way in which we identify the one whom we claim to follow will ultimately determine our identity. Is Jesus the bringer of life and light? Is he the Prince of Peace, the forgiving victim? Is he the one who will come back to earth in angry judgment and cast much of the world's population into a lake of unquenchable fire? Is he the son of an angry deity who needed to crush something in his righteous wrath, so he decided to crush his son, who was himself? Is Jesus the God of all people? Is Jesus the Savior of only those who know the right creeds and prayers and happen to sing the right kind of hymns? Our answer has implications for everything else we believe, not just about religion, but about humanity. If we believe God only values our kind, those who believe our creeds, how sympathetic towards the needs of the rest of the world can we truly be? How interested will we be in fostering peace, especially when that peace comes with a great price? Now when Peter answered, Jesus said to him that he was blessed because he did not learn this from flesh and blood. He didn't learn it from any human being. A man, a human being in an imperfect state, would give the wrong answer, an incomplete answer. The prophet or teacher or great leader, all of these true on some level, but also terribly incomplete. The correct answer, the full answer for who Jesus is, it can only come from the Spirit, which comes from the Father. For us to know who Jesus is, and perhaps even more importantly, for us to portray who Jesus is to a world that is hungering and thirsting to the point of starvation, for peace, for meaning, and for hope, we must live and act in the Spirit that the Father gives, the Spirit of love, of peace, of gentleness, and self-giving. Only then can we know, and only then can we show who Jesus really is. Peter answers that Jesus is the Son of the living God. And in response, Jesus says that upon that level of understanding, upon the solid rock of that spiritual understanding, shall the church be built. If you know that Jesus is the Son of the God of life, not the God of death, or the God of war, or the God of vengeance, if you know that Jesus and the Father are one, together all light, no darkness, all life, not death, all love, no hatred, then you, like Peter, are a rock, unmovable even by the very gates of Hades. I think I'd like to talk about that concept, the gates of Hades, for just a moment. Some Bible translations will call this the gates of hell, and that is in fact unfortunate, for hell and Hades are two very different concepts born of two different mythological systems. Hades, as the text actually reads, was considered the place of the dead. In and of itself, Hades is not a place of punishment. Greco-Roman mythology held that there was a place of punishment within Hades, but Hades itself was not the punishment. It was in fact the place where all the dead went. By the way, Hades was also the name of the mythological god of the underworld who ruled over the dead. Over the years, it seems that many actual places on earth have been given the name Gates of Hades. Usually these places are a geological phenomenon that inspires awe, wonder, or dread, typically a very deep, seemingly bottomless cave. But I believe that here Jesus was literally talking about the gates of death. If you understand Christ as the Son of the God of life, if you become that rock of understanding, your connection to life, to spiritual life, is rock solid and cannot be overcome, even by death itself. Now finally, Jesus says, I will give to you the keys of heaven. Here you go. Here's your set of keys. You can use them to bind on earth and bind in heaven. You can forgive. You can withhold forgiveness. One might suggest that understanding the living God affords one an enormous amount of freedom. But then, if we say we know who Jesus is, if we answer correctly, there can really be only one thing to do with those keys. For the world has had enough of its bondage to sin, enough of suffering, enough of war, enough of prejudice and hatred and revenge. As we examine and re-examine who Christ is, may the Spirit of God, guide us to the correct answer so that we may be about loosening the gates to God's kingdom.